of the most important events of the 20th century, and it had far-reaching consequences. It was largely responsible for the major events which occurred in the rest of the century, including the rise of Hitler and the Nazi Party, World War II, and much of the Cold War which occurred afterwards. The treaty was the result of the First World War. This war was unlike any other because it involved most of the countries of the world. The destruction caused by the war was unheard of in its size, economic impact, and the number of casualties. It was the first war that featured advanced technology, such as submarines, aircraft, radio communication, and poison gas. Manufacturing advances also allowed a great production of weaponry, including new items such as tanks and machine guns. All this resulted in a total of 8,241,000 combat deaths. Not to mention, there were 25 million people who died from the Spanish flu immediately after the war. After the United States entered the war on the side of the Allies, the tide was turned against Germany. US President Woodrow Wilson came up with his 14-point plan of how to end the war in a fair way and to ensure a lasting peace afterwards. The German government was willing to end the war and accept a treaty, trusting that it would be on the basis of Wilson's 14-point plan. The war ended, the German military was dismantled, and the four main Allied leaders met at Versailles to determine the final terms of the treaty. But the victorious Allies brought their 19th century prejudices with them. Germany and its allies, such as Austria-Hungary, were excluded from its discussions, and the victorious Allies, with the exception of Wilson, were determined to punish Germany. Even the French General Foch said, "This is not peace, it is an armistice for 20 years. Foch's prediction turned out to be exactly true. The treaty was very one-sided in its punishment of Germany. Germany was required to give up large parts of its territory, and even part of its population. It lost coal mines and industrial areas, had to dismantle its military, was forced to admit responsibility for the war, and was required to pay large financial reparations of $32 billion, equal to $393 billion in today's money. The German public was shocked, and the German government was unable to oppose or alter the terms of the treaty. If Germany refused to accept the terms, the Allies threatened to invade, and now Germany had no means to fight back. One of the terms said that Germany was to turn over its entire navy. Angry at this, Germany instead sank its remaining ships. The terms were so unpopular in Germany that the leaders who had to sign the Treaty of Versailles were referred to as the November Criminals. As a result of this, the German Weimar Republic, which was the government that had assumed power in Germany after the war, lost much support. Instead, the German people increasingly turned to more radical political parties, of both the left and right. Gaining popularity were the communists on the left, and a new emerging right-wing party called the Nazi Party, and its charismatic leader, World War I veteran Adolf Hitler. The French leader Clemenceau was the most radical of the authors of the Versailles Treaty. He was determined not only to punish Germany, but to make sure it could never pose a threat to France again. He pushed for the terms which took away territory and population, and restricted the rebuilding of Germany's military. Germany's army was limited to 100,000, and it was prohibited from having submarines, tanks, or an air force. British leader David George realized the terms were unfair to Germany, but he could not say so publicly because the British people were as determined to punish Germany as the French. George saw the emerging communist threat from Russia in the east, and he wanted Germany to be strong enough to be able to stop the communist expansion. Behind the scenes, he tried to be easy on Germany, but publicly he signed the treaty. Italian leader Vittorio Orlando was dismissed as irrelevant and ignored the negotiations. American President Wilson, though he was admired, was not allowed to implement his fair 14-point plan for peace. The leaders at Versailles agreed to one part of Wilson's plan, which was the formation of the League of Nations. This was an organization which was a forerunner of today's United Nations. Its purpose was to prevent future wars through negotiations and economic sanctions against any nation which engaged in aggression. Ironically, even though the European countries joined the League of Nations, the American Congress refused to approve Wilson's idea and America did not become a member. Meanwhile, the oppressive terms requiring reparation payments put a severe strain on the German economy. When Germany failed to make reparation payments in 1922, France occupied the Ruhr, which was an important industrial area, causing Germany's economic distress to increase even further. German industries went on strike, contributing to the hyperinflation which destroyed the German mark, creating even more economic distress. On top of this, Germany's colonies were taken away and given to France and England, countries that already had numerous colonies. To add insult to injury, the German public was angry about Section 231 of the treaty, which forced them to admit responsibility for the war. Further economic sanctions against Germany caused some starvation, even of children. Seething under this humiliation and economic hardship, the German public was eager to hear and agree with the dynamic Adolf Hitler. Hitler promised to throw out the Treaty of Versailles. He promised to make Germany great again, to bring back its lost territories and people, to avenge the humiliation of the Allies, and make Germany into a prosperous economic powerhouse. Just as Foch predicted, one step at a time, Germany ignored the terms of the treaty and became economically strong and rearmed. Following the Nazi Party platform, Hitler reunited with Austria and sabotaged the restrictions on Germany's military. At first, submarine crews were trained in other countries. Though it was prohibited in Air Force, many pilots were trained, and the 100,000 army was much stronger because they were called reservists. The Allied powers failed to respond to Hitler's violations of the treaty, so after the first violations, Germany ignored them completely. It soon built a powerful air force, numerous advanced submarines, and a large army complete with fast-moving tanks. German technology was among the best in the world, and enabled Germany to launch Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War. World War I radically changed the culture and political map of Europe, and the Treaty of Versailles cemented these changes. It led to a number of significant developments. Without it, the Nazi Party would probably have never risen to power in Germany. Germany would not have rearmed and sought revenge by attacking other countries. The Soviet Union and communism would not have expanded. World War II would probably not have been fought. We would be living in a much different world today if there had been no World War II, no concentration camps, millions had not died in political murders, and the Cold War between communism and the West had never happened. The Treaty of Versailles didn't only end World War I, but it was a major cause of World War II.
The League of Nations was set up in 1919, directly after World War I, in order to stop such a war from ever happening again. It was the idea of America's President Woodrow Wilson. The League had four main aims. Firstly, to encourage cooperation amongst the world's countries in order to prevent any future wars. Secondly, disarmament. The idea was to try and disarm the world's countries of weapons. Next was to improve social conditions. This meant trying to cure diseases, improve working conditions, and so on. And finally, the League's main aim was world peace, its aims in being too ambitious. But nevertheless, the League was generally seen by many as the only way to maintain peace in the world. It must be said, however, that another world war broke out only 20 years after the creation of the League. World War II began in 1939, and many historians have condemned the League for failing to achieve its aims. We should therefore focus on the key question: was the League of Nations a total failure? The League's weaknesses. The League did not have an army, and therefore no powerful means to enforce its decisions, and instead had to rely on countries like Britain and France. Another critical weakness was that the most powerful country in the world, the USA, did not join. When President Woodrow Wilson returned home, the American Congress refused to allow the USA to join the League, as instead it wanted to stay out of Europe's arguments in order to prevent them being dragged into another war. In addition, the League's organisation was confusing. It had a council of the most important countries, a secretariat that organised the League, a variety of different agencies that dealt with the slave trade and drug dealing, etc., and an assembly where countries met just once a year. Making decisions was therefore a problem because everyone had to agree. This meant that it took a long time to get anything done. Decisions had to be made unanimously, and this slowed down the entire process. Successes of the League. In the 1920s, it can be said that the League was successful. It took 500,000 prisoners of war home after World War I. It helped to arrest slave traders and drug dealers, and it made progress in helping to control and cure diseases like malaria and leprosy. It was also successful in solving problems before they turned into wars. An example was the Åland Islands dispute between Sweden and Finland. The League brought the countries together and solved the problem. Another example was in 1923, when Italy and Greece nearly went to war over the island of Corfu. Failures of the League of Nations in the 1930s. In the early 1930s, two events destroyed people's belief in the ability of the League of Nations to stop wars. In both situations, the League did not act quickly enough or made poor decisions about how to stop the aggressive nations. At the same time, this showed people like Hitler that the League was not strong enough to stand in his way. In 1932, Japan invaded Manchuria, an area of China. This was clearly an example of a strong country invading a weaker one. The League took 1 full year to send Lord Lytton to make a report about what should be done. This was a long and frustrating delay. The League wanted to ban all countries from trading with Japan, but it bought most of its goods from the USA, who was not part of the League. In fact, Britain actually wanted to stay friends with Japan, and without the threat of attack, Japan got away with it and simply left the League. In 1935, Italy invaded Abyssinia in Africa, nowadays known as Ethiopia. Mussolini, the Italian leader, wanted an empire, and he sent his troops to attack. Again, this was another example of a strong country attacking a weaker one. Britain and France were still feeling the effects of the Depression. The League could have banned countries from trading with Italy, but unemployment was rising, and they felt that to stop trading would mean the loss of even more jobs. Instead, Britain and France actually made a secret plan to allow Italy to control an area of Abyssinia. This was great news to Hitler. During this period, Hitler got away with rearmament, marching his troops into the Rhineland and joining up with Austria, all against the Treaty of Versailles. So why did the League fail? The League of Nations had no real power. Without an army, stronger countries did what they wanted, whereas weaker ones did as they were told. The absence of the USA meant that the strongest country in the world could not help to solve the League's problems. And ultimately, the memories of the horrors of World War I meant that Britain and France did not want to get involved. Even if they wanted to, the Depression meant that these two major countries could not really afford any expensive threats. As previously mentioned, the League failed to prevent the most devastating war of all time, that of World War II, that begun in 1939 and ended in 1945.